Our next honoree, Andy Garcia, is the Academy Award-nominated Cuban-born actor, director, and producer, whose 38 films include The Godfather Part 3, The Untouchables, When a Man Loves a Woman, Ocean's 11, and many others. But a special note this evening are his films set in Cuba against the turbulent background of corruption, revolution, and tyranny. Featuring powerful stories and fabulous music, each film portrays the lives, loves, and struggles of the Cuban people from the perspective of individuals in the musical arts, seeking beauty and joy while facing corruption, oppression, subterfuge, and mass murder. Here now are some segments from his films The Lost City, and For Love or Country, the Arturo Sandoval story.
We intend to pass a resolution that will remove Batista through the constitutional process.
Senator Cosillos asked me to prepare a speech for him.
This is the opening statement.
I've made reference to Seneca. Read it aloud, Senator, so we can hear how it sounds.
Okay.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, I must protest, as Seneca did in ancient Rome, of the violence of office. Today, we, the citizens of Cuba, are being persecuted by a tyrant and his reign of terror, meted out to our population by his police, and especially by a certain colonel in the force, whose name has become synonymous with sudden death. Seneca was persecuted by two tyrants, Caligula and Nero. In spite of that, Seneca advocated the return to the Republic. Unafraid. Mr. Speaker, Seneca, not the Neros of this world, should be an example to us.
How many more do you
Recoge eso. Fayove. Let's move. Don't waste any time with that. Let's move. You seem trouble, Fayove. Is it about the captain we shot?
Listen to me very carefully. In an insurrection, the end justifies the means. What is an insurrection? Huh? Armed struggle. What is the end? Revolution, which entails social, economic, and political transformations. Like I said, the end justifies the means.
Stop the music! Stop the music! Stop that music!
Who are you?
I am Soraya Munoz, a delegate for the Musicians Union.
What authority do you have to come here and stop my rehearsal?
The government gave me the authority. See, you own this beautiful cabaret, but we own the orchestra.
Really?
Really. If I tell the orchestra not to play, they can't play.
Is that so?
Fico, we're in the union. They control the union.
I see. And on what grounds do you have to come in here and stop my show?
You just can't use the saxophone in the orchestra anymore.
Come again?
The saxophone is an instrument of the imperialists.
The saxophone was invented by a man named Sax in Belgium.
Do you know what the Belgian imperialists are doing in the Congo? They're a bunch of murderers.
You don't say.
No, I do say. And I am saying that if you want the orchestra to play, then you have to go without the saxophone. Otherwise, I will stop the show.
You're always taking a risk because in Cuba, you never know where the line is. You can play Gershwin once too often.
Not being able to play Gershwin does not constitute persecution.
It is if someone decides that it's counter-revolutionary and they come and they put you in jail. Because in Cuba, you live with that fear every day that someone might come to you, to your house, to your family, and hurt you because of a song. Just a song. And that is persecution.
What are you listening to?
This is Atmosphere. Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, live at Carnegie Hall, 1947. Side B, track 2.
You know what I mean.
It's just music. Great music.
You're not supposed to listen to that station.
Now we're safe.
It's not funny. You could get in trouble.
Believe me, I know. I spent 4 months in military jail for listening to that.
He's throwing his life away. My father used to be a great mechanic. And they came and they took his garage away.
Keep your voice down.
What are you afraid of? The revolution? Remember, it gives us everything.
They didn't take your father's garage. He gave it up.
They nationalized it! They took away what he believed in. They took away his dream, his love, his trade, the thing that he did.
We all made sacrifices, Arturo.
For what?
For what? For the country. For an ideal. Free hospitals, free education.
Sure, of course.
And by the way, those 100,000 people running away at Mariel, they are giving up.
Giving up?
Yes!
That is exactly what they are not doing. And by the way, what good is free education if you can't read what you want, if you can't say what you want? What good are eyes if everybody is blind?
Why do you think the Cuban government is so afraid of your music?
They're not afraid of my music. They're afraid of ideas.
Oh, come on. Fidel Castro is afraid of your ideas?
Fidel Castro is afraid of any idea that's not his. You know how he overthrew Batista?
I know it was a popular revolution.
It was a popular idea. It was a great idea. He promised the Cuban people what they were desperate for: restoration of a constitution, democracy, freedom from a dictatorship. And he did it with 80 people and 50 guns and a boat that almost sank because somebody left the toilet running.
Well, that can't be all they had.
That's all he needed, because the idea gave him the strength of an army.
Our next speaker has witnessed repression firsthand in his own country, and I'm delighted to introduce him to speak about our second honoree. Alberto Vargas Llosa is Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Global Prosperity at the Independent Institute. Alvaro's weekly column is nationally syndicated by the Washington Post Writers Group, and his many books include Liberty for Latin America, The Che Guevara Myth, and Lessons from the Poor, which I've already mentioned. You have a copy. Last year, he was named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum, and is currently completing the 4-part National Geographic documentary on Latin America entitled Consequences. Alvaro?
Thank you, David. When I told my wife I was going to be sitting next to Andy Garcia and introducing him, she said, I need 2 autographs. And I said, why? You've never asked me for even 1 autograph. She said, I need a replacement in case I lose the other one. So you can imagine I am approaching this introduction with a deep sense of humiliation tonight. A few years ago, I was living in London, where one of my best friends was Cuban novelist Guillermo Cabrera Infante, the author of acclaimed books such as Three Trapped Tigers and Infante's Inferno. Guillermo had 3 passions: literature, his wife Miriam, and Cuba, his country of origin, which he had left for political reasons many decades earlier, and where his books were banned and his name was unspeakable. Every couple of weeks or so, I would visit him in his house on Gloucester Road in South Kensington, where Miriam, Guillermo, and I, surrounded by stacks of books, VHS videos, and old records, invariably spent hours talking about Cuba. On almost every occasion, he would bring up The Lost City, a 2-decade-old project on which he had been working to no avail. It had proved impossible to raise the capital necessary to produce a movie about Cuba in the 1950s, seen through the eyes of a family torn, as every Cuban family at the time, by revolution. A revolution that would end up as the god Saturn devouring its own children. He had an ally in that quixotic enterprise, whose name invariably came up in the conversation: Andy Garcia. The actor's passion for the project was no less ardent than Guillermo's. In a stroke of poetic justice, Andy Garcia was finally able to put together the funds when Guillermo, frail and worn out, began to get very sick. My dear friend was able to see the movie, whose screenplay he co-wrote with Andy Garcia, just before he died. The film was produced in association with the actor's production company, Cineson Productions, and Andy Garcia composed the original score and produced the soundtrack. As many of you know, The Lost City tells the story of Fico, a nightclub owner in revolutionary Cuba, a country under a vicious right-wing dictatorship in which there was a high standard of living, by Latin American standards at least, and a vibrant culture. But there was also a profound dissatisfaction with the corrupt political environment. The old regime was soon replaced with the tyranny that half a century later is still in place. Every aspect of that tragic story is captured in the film. Families ripped apart by force masquerading as idealism, acts of inconceivable personal cruelty, the obliteration of individual liberty, and the uprooting of millions of people from their land. And we see the intoxicating music of Benny Moré and the energy of rhythms such as mambo, cha-cha-cha, and rumba ceding their place to the rigidity and paralysis of censorship and fear. What was particularly moving about that film was the fact that a Hollywood actor who did not need to risk his reputation by undertaking a project certain to ruffle feathers in an industry that still sees Fidel Castro as a romantic revolutionary and Che Guevara as a modern-day Robin Hood, dared to co-write, direct, and act in it at all. It was an act of courage and justice. The movie reminds us of the roots of the Cuban tragedy, namely the utter inadequacy of the country's institutions and elites, which eventually crystallized in the communist dictatorship. Cuba's independence could have produced a successful republic, partly due to the local political culture and foreign obstacles placed on their ability to exercise self-responsibility. Cubans failed to substitute the rule of law for violence during the half-century between the day when they obtained their independence and the time of Castro's triumph. The conservative movement that opposed independence never developed into a force for stable institutions, nor did the liberals who stood for an independent republic, civil rights, and upward social mobility evolve into anything comparable to the United States Republican founders. Perhaps if Spain had not limited political rights after the 10-year war from 1868 to 1878, the Liberal Party would have been worthy of the name. Perhaps if the United States had not tied the political hands of the early Cuban Republic leaders, many of them capable of replacing the extraordinary José Martí, who organized the 1895 revolution, would have emerged, marginalizing the aspiring despots. But ultimately, it was the Machados, the Batistas, and the Castros who prevailed. Like so many Cubans in the United States, or in Europe for that matter, Andy Garcia's defense of his home country's freedom has put him at odds with a good part of the intellectual and cultural establishment. Unwilling to settle for the comfortable stereotypes of bien pensant pseudo-liberals who love to project their thirst of the exotic on Cuba, Andy Garcia, who left the island with his family in 1961 when he was only 5 years old, knows, as one critic who defended him put it, that in Cuba, inner tubes were used in truck tires, oil drums for oil, and styrofoam for insulation, and today they are used as flotation devices to flee the glorious liberation while fighting off hammerheads and tiger sharks on their way to the Florida Keys. Like hundreds of thousands of Cubans, Andy Garcia moved to the United States not because his family wanted to, but because they had to. And they prospered in this country. His father was able to build a cosmetics business while suffering the indignity of seeing many American politicians, writers, and activists celebrating the regime that expelled his mother, an English teacher, his father, a landowner and attorney, his brother and himself from the land of their ancestors. As he himself likes to say, Andy Garcia decided to become an actor after he contracted mononucleosis and gave up his athletic aspirations. He started to act while at Florida International University. From there, he went to Hollywood, where after working as a waiter, he got his break in the TV series Hill Street Blues after a casting agent saw him perform in an improvisational group at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles. That was followed by his roles in Blue Skies Again, The Mean Season, and 8 Million Ways to Die, which in turn led to the part that turned him into a star, Agent George Stone in The Untouchables. In 1990, his reputation achieved new heights when he played the unforgettable Vincent Corleone, the grandson of Vito Corleone in The Godfather Part 3. But his film career, which landed him a dizzying succession of major roles over the years in movies such as Internal Affairs, When a Man Loves a Woman, Night Falls on Manhattan, and the Ocean's 11, 12, and 13 series, never weakened his loyalty to Cuba and his defense of human rights. The idea of human rights is one that has become very confusing in modern times because it has come to mean many things to different people, and power politics and statist ideologies manipulate it to fit their goals. There's a big debate about the origin of human rights, but whether we trace their roots back to Urukagina's code in a Sumerian city-state more than 4,000 years ago, to Cyrus's cylinder 2,500 years ago, to Magna Carta, to the United States Declaration of Independence, or even William Lloyd Garrison, who might have been the first to use the exact phrase, all of us in this room know exactly what we mean by human rights. And so does Andy Garcia, who has denounced the oppression of the Cuban people time and again. But there are other ways in which he has stood for human rights. One of them is the rescue of his country's cultural heritage against the Cuban government's efforts to replace it with its own fraudulent version. As one of the most famous and beloved members of the Miami community, a much misunderstood community that is as pluralistic, tolerant, free-spirited, and jovial as any in the United States, even if it does have its share of crazies, and I have lived there, Andy Garcia has paid homage to his fatherland's artistic legacy in movies such as Cachao, Like His Rhythm, There Is No Other, a tribute to legendary mambo composer Israel Cachao Lopez that marked his directorial debut, or For Love of Country, the Arturo Sandoval story, the tale of the acclaimed jazz musician who fled Cuba in order to pursue his career, a movie whose score and soundtrack he also produced. His record label has put out outstanding Cuban music, some of which he performs himself. Andy Garcia spends time in Miami, mostly summers, and is married to a Cuban, Maria Victoria, with whom he has 4 children. He embodies that nostalgia of the lost city that is the hallmark of the Cuban exile community, a sentiment so powerful that it is transmitted from generation to generation, and transmitted in such a way that even a 5-year-old boy with no personal recollection of where he was born grew up to make it his. It constitutes a creative longing for what is no longer, strictly speaking, a real Cuba, but one made of memory and imagination, which makes it perhaps even more real. There is, of course, no way of bringing back to life the more than 10,000 Cubans who, according to Cuba Archive, have perished under Castro through executions or imprisonment, or the many more who never made it to the Florida Keys. According to various estimates, 1 in 4 rafters never makes it. And there is no way to give back to those whose lives were spent in the moral and material wasteland of the tyranny, their lost years. But people like tonight's honoree also remind us that there are things that no totalitarian system can take away from the people over whom it lords. Their love of freedom is one of them. Andy Garcia does all of this with elegance and respect for his fans. Unlike so many Hollywood stars who parade their private lives in frivolous ways, he protects his family from the prying eyes of the media. We must thank him for defying the modern cult of gossip that turns moral and intellectual hierarchies upside down to make what is secondary all important and demean what really matters. In doing so, he reminds us of the treasure that is each person's personal realm. We don't know when Andy Garcia will be able to go back to the country from which he was taken away, or when his countrymen and women will be able to watch his movies, including The Lost City. But one thing is certain: no matter how much more time passes until that is possible, one day his fellow Cubans on the island will be thankful for all that he has done for them, and for what is yet to come, including the films he recently completed, City Island and New York, I Love You. He has won many awards as an actor, director, and producer, including a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination, the Harvard University Foundation Award, 3 Alma Awards, 2 Imogen Awards, and the inclusion of his star in the Walk of Fame. But tonight, we want to thank him for his devotion to liberty, for being that rare combination of the cinematographic imagination and civic virtue, and for the inestimable way in which he has preserved the artistic heritage of which he himself is a stalwart heir. The Independent Institute is proud to add to the list of honors with which his career has blessed him by distinguishing him with the Alexis de Tocqueville Award for being a champion of liberty and human rights. Thank you.
Andy, you've devoted your life, as Alvaro has pointed out, to excellence in film and music and far more. And you've gone far further in courageously using your talent and public stature to boldly champion civil and economic liberties and overcome the plight of the Cuban people under communism and any form of tyranny. And to express our gratitude, I want to present you with the Alexis de Tocqueville Award. It's an honor and privilege to have all of our honorees with us this evening, and an honor to be able to provide this kind of recognition, which again only touches and scratches the surface of what we owe to them. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very difficult to follow such eloquent words from a great writer I respect deeply, Mr. Vargas Llosa, who comes from a great tradition, as we all know, of writers, and also of a family that has stood up against tyranny and the lack of freedoms around the world, including, Mario and Alberto. There was, I guess, only one thing that I found maybe slightly inaccurate in terms of what Alberto says. When I left Cuba when I was 5 and a half, it's about 2 years after the Castro's takeover of the country. I left with many memories. And I think that because for some reason, once someone immigrates, or in our case, are exiled into a country, and you begin to realize, at first I thought we were just going on a vacation. It was presented to me as we're going to Miami. I thought it was just a trip. I never obviously been outside of Cuba, but it seemed like we were just going on a trip. That once it became a reality in my mind as a young man that we weren't going back, excuse me. I think that you begin to protect those memories and those images. But in a way, I was fortunate, even though I had not left the country that I cherished so much, and I was able to come here. Maybe I should start again. I should leave and then step back. Because the reality is, sorry. The reality is this country afforded me everything that had been taken away from me. When I was about 5, my father came home. By then, all the properties had been nationalized since 1961 and a half. And Castro had betrayed all his promises of the restoration of the Constitution and elections and all the things that supposedly were part of the manifesto of the anti-Batista rebellion, and had solidified power and declared himself a Marxist, or as we now know, that it's more of a Fidelista than anything else. But he passed a law which you gave up the rights to your children to the state, and for state education, which quickly turned into indoctrination, and a very young, I think it was 12 years old, military obligation. And my father came home, and my mother said to him, I saw your son marching and singing the Internationale, which is a great irony because throughout this time, Cuba was constantly, Castro was having sort of diatribes about, anti-American imperialism and Yankee see, Cuba see, Yankee no, and American influences over Cuba, and yet through the back door, he was letting Russian imperialism walk right in and take over the country. And I was marching, she caught me marching and singing and humming the Internationale at the age of 5, and I hadn't even been in school yet. And shortly thereafter, we gathered the family. We came first. My father followed. He was involved in the Peter Pan project, which some of those of you don't know, Peter Pan is an organization through Monsignor Walsh in Miami that parents of Cuban children who could not leave the country were sending their children ahead through the Catholic Church to foster homes in America, hoping that they could reunite with them. Some did. Some never saw their children again, but they did not want their children to grow up under that system. So my father stayed behind because he was one of the lawyers who was helping and at times falsifying visas to get children out of the country. And he sent us ahead and then eventually came on a flight, on a Peter Pan flight. He brought 2 children on the flight and asked the pilot, who was a friend of his, to save him a seat. And under the pretext of walking the children onto the flight, he stayed on the plane and came. So I am, I guess, the beneficiary of America's great generosity and all the things that we were deprived in Cuba, and the sacrifices that my father and mother made for me to have this opportunity. So I cannot take credit for anything I've done. Because I believe it's this system that creates and gives the opportunities for those who dream, that slowly, one step at a time, you can achieve those dreams. And I go around the world, and I'm constantly asked about Cuba. And the one thing that not only frustrates me, but continually fascinates me in a way because people have a perception of Cuba that is based on the very propaganda that the Castro regime has been putting out for the past 50 years. And when you try to simply explain to them what the system is about and what's going on, they go, really? I didn't know that. And as we all know, over the years, there's been an extraordinary support and a blind eye that's turned towards that regime and the atrocities of that regime. And there are problems all over the world, as we all know. And I don't say that Cuba's problems are greater than things that have been going on all over the world in Africa for decades and much longer than even in Cuba. But the reality is, for some reason, that Cuba and that regime gets, they catch a break, They seem to permit that. They seem to celebrate the fact that he stands up against America, and that is a popular enough cause for them to look and turn a blind eye to all the things that he does. And it's a very frustrating thing because those of us who know the reality of what's going on in Cuba, it's a very painful reality in which I live in. The movie The Lost City, which is, for me, was just I looked at it as a movie that had all the classical elements of all the great films that I grew up with. A time of dramatic historical transition, music, dance, conflicts within a family, impossible love as a central metaphor. You can love her, but you can't be with her. And these are the makings of movies like Dr. Zhivago and a lot of the great movies that dealt with that. But for some reason, my movie became sort of like the most difficult thing for anybody to embrace. For 16 years, not one studio in the United States would embrace the idea of giving any money to distribute the movie. Even at the peak of whatever popularity I have been able to achieve in my life, at the peak of that, with actors like Robert Duvall and Dustin Hoffman, everybody supporting me in the movie, they would not accept, they would not support it. Once I made the movie independently with the help of private equity, by the way, Mr. Bowes, I will be approaching you for some. If you want some venture capital, I got an idea for you. And you will have the great, I don't know if it will be the privilege, but you'll have the honor of being the only person that would be interested in the movie. But I found one of those people, and he believed in me and the film, and through that support and my $9 million, and shot in 35 days and prepped in 4 weeks, which is insane for a movie which is a period piece set in Cuba, with not be able to go to Cuba to shoot it. We made the movie. We started approaching major festivals around the world to show the movie. The first one we approached was Toronto Film Festival. I get a word back from the distributor, who was a foreign distributor, saying, they said, the movie, halfway through the movie, they thought the movie would open the festival. Then once the movie was over, it was a pass. And I go, we went from opening the festival to a pass in the context of 2 hours? And I said, oh, I see the first half of the movie, it was the anti-Batista rebellion. And the second half of the movie was Fidel Castro's betrayal of his own revolution. Oh, I see, I get it now. And it began like that. Festivals all around the world began to pass on the film. Festivals that I had been with many other movies. And there was one gentleman who did not pass. And he's here tonight, Mr. Tom Luddy, from the Telluride. And he honored us with the opening night of the Telluride Film Festival and a tribute to Cabrera Infante, who had passed away. And we showed the movie, I believe it was 6 times, which I think, Tom, if you correct me, was maybe like a record in the festival, correct? Because of the demand, you were able to, if people want to see the movie, they'll keep screening it. And we ended up having to show the movie 6 times. Every major distributor in the American film business, and here, was there, but no one bought the film. There wasn't one Cuban at the festival. Well, there was about 10 Cubans, the members of my cast, who went. But other than that, it was an American cinephile audience, mostly, I would say, liberal. Everybody loved the movie, but yet no distributor would jump on the film. One woman from Magnolia Pictures, who was in their HD network, saw it and says, I would like to, I love this movie, I want to talk to Mark Cuban and his company, and there was the only little bite that came out of the festival, and slowly we pursued it. It was the only distributor that was willing to stand behind the film. The film now has been seen all over the world, and it has been seen in Cuba clandestinely. It's been pirated as DVDs all through Cuba because I get a lot of feedback about that. But again, I said to David, and this is the curious thing that I learned, once the movie came out, and this is, I think it's important in America and for all of us, and I don't mean to go on because I'm probably taking too long here, and I'm so honored to be in the same company of William and Bishop Tutu, and I don't want to take any more time, but I really felt that as the movie came out, I realized that because I've shown the movie so much to people who have no issues about Cuba and find the movie to be completely just like any other movie, well-balanced, and it's a movie, it's a historical picture like Schindler's List would be. There was a very curious thing for me because I had never experienced that kind of deep animosity towards my work in a way. And I just got back from Cuba, I just got back from Cuba and I was there at the party about half an hour ago. And I just got back from Italy 2 days ago. And I was doing some interviews there. And again, I found myself in a position where trying to educate people of what's going on, because truly people do not know either the history of Cuba, what went on in Cuba, or what's going on in Cuba right now. And they're still being somehow fed this sort of false information. And so I celebrate the Independent Institute providing a forum for that type of education, because ultimately there are societies and countries all around the world that we need to know what's going on. And as Jose Marti said, liberty is something that you must be able to sacrifice your life for. And for those of us who have had liberty taken away from us, we know its true value. And I thank, as a proud American, the opportunity to pursue my dreams and speak my voice, which is why my parents brought me here. Thank you.
Back to your table. Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you sincerely, Andy. Our third course will now begin.